You've probably seen my video on the Fear and Hunger God lore explained, and I've covered the really obscure and mysterious ones already, like the Sulfur God and Logic. But what about the more known ones? What about the most well-known god in the universe? Well, let's talk about Alll-Merr. In his early life, Alll-Merr was born a human man of a virgin mother in the city of Jedediah. He eventually gained influence through his teachings and through his teachings of the older gods, and gained quite a big following. In his teachings, he united tons of people from different religions and converted them to his own. He would gather 12 friends that were especially close to him and made them his 12 apostles, which only furthered his influence in the known world. Obviously, kings and sultans from all over Europa and the eastern sanctuaries learned of the man teaching and converting people to his religion, despite not being a god himself. Although their gods were probably not as noble as to take down a false god, they feared Alll-Merr, and how much influence he had gained so quickly. And so they had him arrested with the help of a jealous apostle who had betrayed them. More than likely that's Black Caleb, and that's a whole can of worms on if he actually betrayed Alll-Merr or not. In the year of 0 of the new calendar, he was publicly executed and humiliated, and then he was stabbed by a spear on the cross and finally executed. When he was executed, his soul was sent to the ancient city of Mahabra, and then his body was laid to rest in the tomb of the gods, or whatever it was before it was named that. His soul became an ascended god in Mahabra, and then he returned to the earth. He then used a sword of his own blood to lay waste to the sultans and kings that had wronged him. He then once again ascended and now left his 11 apostles to spread the good word of his religion. That is only one story of his origins in the game. However, there is an alternate story that is also written in the Skin Bible of Alll-Merr in Fear and Hunger 2 that makes more sense to me. This account says that Sylvian, the goddess of love, created humanity based on the drawings of another god, Vitruvia. Vitruvia, loving these creations at first, started seeing the evil mankind could bring and how imperfect they were. Sylvian, blinded by the love for her creation, disagreed with Vitruvia and said mankind was perfect as it was. Vitruvia, once again disagreeing, set out to make a perfect human, one that was exactly like her original design. So Vitruvia did just that, made the perfect human, Alll-Merr. Then the story continues as it was already in the first story. As Enki, the author of the Skin Bible, says in the Skin Bible, there is no reason these two both cannot be true. However, in philosophy they differ. The first story makes Alll-Merr out to be a human god, one becoming an ascended god through the strength of man and mankind alone. However, the second says it was deigned from the start. He was prophesied to do that, and that Alll-Merr was already destined to become a god from the moment he was born, and it didn't matter if he gained a following or not, and he didn't become a god through the strength of man alone, but an old god interfered. As Enki says, however, it's probably somewhere between the two. Alll-Merr is somehow both human and influenced through the gods somehow. However, we cannot talk about Alll-Merr without talking about the Sulfur God, which if you want to learn more about, you can check out the video I made on him. You can click on the link on the top of your screen. However, let's do a little bit of a rundown here. At the end of Fear and Hunger 2, the main villain, Percola, will tell you the whole game is a way to recruit new members into his cult, worshipping the Sulfur God. Several clues around town clue you in that Alll-Merr and Sulfur are somehow connected. Sulfur is a horrible deity that emphasizes freedom, allowing those with the will to follow him to do whatever they want, free from the conscience of humanity. But Pugzer, what does Sulfur have to do with Alll-Merr? Well, there's a good amount of things that point to Alll-Merr and Sulfur being one and the same, or two halves of the same whole. Remember that humanity that Alll-Merr left behind when he died? It is very possible that that half is Sulfur, and all the hate and the rage and all that was left when he ascended, and it festered in the sulfur pits and became the Sulfur God himself. Although, another thing of note is that in the eastern sanctuaries, the Church of Alll-Merr depict him as a slender human man with long black hair. However, in the western world, like Europa and where most of these games take place, he is depicted as a muscular white man that is bald, because when he ascended he lost all his hair for some reason, according to the lore of the game. The reason for this discrepancy is because the eastern sanctuaries depict him before he ascended, and the western world depict him after what he came back and slaughtered with everyone with that blood blade. But there are theories that state that they are the same person. Spells that Alll-Merr grants through the Hexen table include his Bloodblade, which I kind of realize sucks because you have to summon it every single battle, and that wastes a turn. At the very least, it wastes a Spice Forge slot, which isn't good. He can also grant you the ability to summon the Lance of Longinus, in New Game Plus at least, as well as the Reverse Crown of Thorns, which just instant kills you for some reason, which is slightly better than Bloodblade. The Lance of Longinus, however, is slightly better than Bloodblade, but it still needs to be summoned, so whatever. His symbol is a cross, and it grants fast travel portals, like in the first game. If you engrave his symbol on your face, you get +3 defense and 85% physical damage negation. Which is okay, but why would you engrave anything other than the God of Fear and Hunger sigil, which gives you more agility? Alright, let's get this out of the way now. There's an obvious inspiration for Alll-Merr. If you are at all familiar with Christianity, or just Jesus in general, you'll notice some less than subtle connections. Jesus was also betrayed by an apostle of his and was stabbed by a spear on the cross and then crucified to death. Jesus, however, descended to hell and then rose from the dead 3 days after and then ascended to heaven. However, there is sort of a difference, as Jesus didn't slaughter his executioners with a sword made of his own blood. Which brings me to the theories about Alll-Merr. It is very possible Alll-Merr has never existed. It is very possible that the Sulfur is the one and only one that has ever existed, and has used the guise of the merciful Alll-Merr to establish a new world order. Because if you go into the Church of Alll-Merr in Pre-Evil, in Fear and Hunger 2, you'll realize they worship someone who looks a lot like Alll-Merr, but is a bastardized version of him, as also will say. It's pretty well established that a lot of Alll-Merr churches worship Sulfur instead, and just use Alll-Merr as a guise to control the world and be greedy. I wonder why that sounds familiar. Anyway, this theory states that there is no Alll-Merr at all. That all the churches are using him as a guide, not just a few, because as we stated earlier, Jesus did not slaughter people with the Bloodblade, so it is very possible that the real Alll-Merr did die, and that the Sulfur god has taken his place ever since. I think this theory is true. I think this is where Miro is going with the story, actually. I honestly think that's what's happened in the Fear and Hunger universe, because when has Jesus asked for human sacrifices like in the Fear and Hunger universe? That's a bad example. But when has Jesus asked for human sacrifices recently? I think that Alll-Merr has already established a new world order. But that's for Miro to tell us. And he's not going to tell us anytime soon. Either way, I love all of you. And thank you for watching.